Hey, I'm Mike Byrnes. I'm super excited to bring you a new program called Business Best by Mike Byrnes, by Byrnes. That's me. I am a consultant. I've been doing that since 2008. I'm really focused on helping advisors grow. I do a lot with businesses, but I also help nonprofits on the side. I love doing what I do. My joy is really helping businesses grow. That's really when I can see the most value in what I'm doing. So that's a focus. But I created this program because there's a lot of people out there, whether you're a business owner or you're an individual and you're struggling in some way and things get a little difficult. I just have a lot in my head, so I thought I'd share it, and it would bring me joy if it makes you more successful, and that would be the whole point of this program. I do want to say before I kind of get into the setup of what the program's going to be, I will tell you that some of the advice I give will be, standard best practices that have worked for years and years and years. But I am a big believer that things like artificial intelligence and other technologies are going to completely revolutionize every industry. We're really going to see some significant change. So that whole hockey stick mentality, or Moore's Law, which was about transistors and circuits, but it basically meant that capacity would double and double and double and multiply. I don't think we have any clue of what changes are heading our way because of AI. So I'll definitely make that a part of this program and bring you some updates on the artificial intelligence front. So really what I thought this first episode would be all about is just setting up the program and letting you know what some of the questions are going to be that you probably have that I'll try to answer. Starting off, what's your business plan? I don't really think that people that don't have a business plan can't be successful, but on the consulting side, the only thing that I require is that they have a written business plan. I can remember one time there was a very successful business, and there was a speaker at a conference, and she said she got with the owners one year, and they were out at a pub, and they actually flipped the back of the napkin over, and they wrote their business initiatives down, and she framed that little napkin. I don't think writing on a napkin is the best practice for a business plan, but she framed it because it helped them have a vision of what they're trying to accomplish and help them deliver on the results and stay focused. And so that little story of that napkin I thought was so effective. So definitely we'll talk about business planning. A business plan to me is a lot like the trunk of a tree. And then the roots are the kind of the more specifics that you get into. So usually, like I said, one of the things that I like to focus in on is growth, and most businesses want to make more money. If it's a nonprofit, they're going to want to bring in more fundraisers or more people to participate in what they're trying to do. So what are those roots to the business plan? Growth is usually in the top 5 of the initiatives, usually in the top 3, if not number 1. So then how does that growth plan look? Specifically, what do you put into it? And we'll talk a lot about that, and that'll be a great focus. Next thing would be then, what are the specific goals? I came up with this. There's a thing called SMART goals, and I tried to trump it and come up with something that was one letter less, but I came up with the best goals. Is it business driven? Is it effective? Is it specific? And is it timely? So that's best. And really, if you kind of come up with that strategy to your business plan, once you get it into the weeds a little bit, that's going to help you hold yourself accountable and have some key metrics to get there. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Related to metrics of success, or us consultants, we like kind of lingo like KPIs, key performance indicators, whatever they might be. Those specifics are the things that you can measure to. I actually love to have what those goals are. If you accomplish your 1-year goal, 5-year goal, 10-year goal, or even it could be even shorter. What's your 90-day goal look like, 30-day, or even for a week? And then how do you specifically try to get to accomplish that? When you look at goals, I'm a big believer, we'll talk about it more in the program, but having a dashboard and being very specific of what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm a visual person, and I think 2/3 of the world is too. So having a dashboard, just like in your car where you have all the little things that you track and how fast you're going, how much oil you have, all that stuff. Your business should be the same way. What are those little visuals that you're going to look at and track? And so growth is one of them. What are those metrics of growth, and are you reaching those goals? It can be part of the business plan, or it can be part of the growth plan. But what are your target markets? It's so important to have that focus of who you're trying to focus in on. The companies that are going after all different types of people usually get spread too thin and kind of are just not effective. When you wake up in the morning, if you're an individual, you only have so much time in the day. So having that one focus, or maybe three target markets, some people refer to them as a niche market. Then you can kind of do a trial and error and see where you will be more successful, and then focus in on those areas. That can be something that can really work too. But having that target market, then you start to identify all the ways that you can penetrate that audience, and then bring in more people like them to increase your success and help you grow. Part of that ties in really well with your brand and really what's your unique value proposition. So I always talk about consulting lingo. That's probably another one. But that story, who you are, what you do, how you help people, why do you do it, all those types of things are differentiators that help you stand out from the rest of the competition. And that will actually filter into things like your website and your marketing communications. So you don't have a really good strategy there, how can you move forward? I always say a good test is, if you're married, ask your spouse to explain to somebody what you do, or that significant other, or maybe it's a family member, or whatever it might be, a best friend. If they can't articulate it, and you probably told them what you do a whole bunch of times, guess what? You're probably not good at getting your brand message out there. So that is definitely a focus of something that we'll talk about in the program. One of the major things to focus in on is your existing clients. How can you do better in that area? How can you get more leads from them, et cetera? But the number one thing to kind of start with is client retention. If you're losing clients on the back end, and no matter how fast you grow, if you're losing them on the back end, it's just going to kill your growth projections and where you end up going. So that's really a thing you should take a quick look at. A lot of the businesses that I work with, I don't necessarily have a problem there, but if they do, they oftentimes don't want to admit to it. So that's something I like to just take a look at, just to know what's going on. And one of the ways as a consultant, as an independent third party, to do that is through client research, and really get a satisfaction scale on a 1 to 10, how is this business doing? If you don't have that information and track it annually, or at least every other year, how can you know for a fact that you're doing well? Most people, and the nice thing about having research, if you have a facilitator and a third party do it, you can really get that information where it's unbiased. If you ask a client directly, how are we doing, they're probably, most of them are just going to give you that warm, fuzzy feeling. They're not going to give you something that is constructive. Some people will, like a business executive, or I'm a consultant, I wouldn't be afraid to share advice on how to improve. But some people run from that. They don't want to have that feeling of conflict and that stress. So really, we can talk about client research and how that can impact you, and it can help with the retention if retention's an issue. When you look at your clients, do a real deep dive on them and find out, do they work with your competitors in any way? There's a term called share a wallet, or whatever it might be. Do you have the majority of that relationship? Do you own it? And if you don't, and they're using a competitor in some way, you're always open to having that retention issue, and it's always a competitive situation. So there's strategies on how to really own that relationship, get your arms around it, and push the competitors out so they're never a threat. When you have your clients and you have that list of how they're supporting you and bringing in revenue, how cool is it to have maybe an Excel or something more sophisticated, columns of where that revenue is coming from? And when you do that, you can do some really quick analysis and do some segmentation to see, is there some cross-sell opportunity? Is there another service that you can provide to them that could bring in more money? So that's an easy way to just maximize that relationship, and something that you should always be considering. So when you're talking with your clients, always kind of keep in mind you can't be selling to them all the time, but there are opportunities where you can upsell and do that cross-selling. So again, it kind of goes back to that client research and having that relationship and knowing them better than anyone else to say, hey, what's the right fit for them? And if you're trying to do something that's client-centric and really trying to help them, those conversations of like upselling, most people don't want to be considered a salesperson. It just kind of has this stigma. But in reality, we're all salespeople. We're always selling, whether it's with your family, what movie you go to on the weekend or where you go to dinner. You're kind of always selling, or they're selling you. We just naturally sell all the time, so don't be afraid of the word sale. But I would say that you really need to know that client better than anyone else, and you can't have that blind spot. You have to use research to get there. The next thing is, once you have those really happy clients, advocates, raving fans, whatever you want to call them, how do you get them to introduce you? Some of the businesses that we work with, they have these loyalists. Like, they'll never, ever, ever leave the business, but in reality, they just don't want to ever give a referral. And that is a shame, because there are so many opportunities to get introduced. Again, there's some people that just will never give a referral. They're just not wired to do that. But there are other people that would really love to give you a referral. So it is fantastic to identify them and figure out who they are, and then have a strategy within your client base. Because if client referrals are a main way that you grow your business, you should have a strategy. You should have it really well documented, and actually get down to not just here's the overall overarching strategy, the 30,000-foot view, but get down to that view where you're looking at, how can you work with that individual client or household and actually work with them to facilitate more ways to get introduced. I'll talk a little bit more in a second about strategic alliances and how you can get some great partnerships that are going that will also give you referrals and give you leads. But the reality is, one of the best ways to start a new strategic alliance is to get introduced from an existing client. And how cool if the existing client is a potential strategic alliance too. So usually what we'll do is, again, we'll go back to that target market work. It's so important that it's really, really crucial that you do that work. Once you know your target market better than anyone else, you'll actually kind of come up with all these different ideas for potential lead sources. So whether it is professionals, whether it is associations, whether it's different things that they read, write, it doesn't always have to be business related either, because if you know your target market better than anyone else, it could be, if they're wealthy, it could be where they shop. If they are religious, it could be the religious leader, or they're philanthropic, it could be the charity that they support. So there's all different types of ways to get introduced and create some kind of unique partnerships. So something to think about. Usually when we do some growth work with our clients, that is the one area where there's definitely low-hanging fruit and we see the most potential for them to grow. So a great area to focus once you kind of do those other steps. All right, so now you identified those raving fans, or those, basically your virtual sales force, your clients that love you and want to introduce you. How do you maximize that? You can kind of just let it happen, or you can create a strategy and create opportunities to get introduced. When it comes to referrals, and I'll talk about it a lot more in the program, but there's 3 simple ways that it happens. One is you just let it happen. You wow them with your services and then hope they talk about you and word of mouth spreads. Number 2 is create opportunities to get introduced. And that is a great one, because and that's where event marketing might really kick in. If you create that opportunity where someone could meet you in person, that is going to be that way that in this virtual world we're in, that's the way that you can really have them make that human connection. I'll say it all the time in this program. Humans want to work with humans. I've said it for years. Even though we're in this kind of digital age, that could be so important. All right, with that said, the third category, and again, it's an oversimplified way to get introduced, but the third category is to create content that they'll share. And I'm a huge fan of videos, because if you're in a video and you have it recorded and like this, I'm on a screen, it just creates something that can be shared by your clients. And now imagine that prospect sees you, likes you, thinks you're an expert, that referral, now they felt like they get to know you, and if you kind of show your personal side and smile and make that great connection, even though it's a one-way connection, they're only seeing you, you're not seeing them, it can be a great way to get referrals. With event marketing, I do believe it can work for a lot of businesses. It is very time intensive and expensive, so what we'll do with our clients is really make sure that there's a good ROI plan in this, your return on investment. You really need to see that. But the nice thing about events is that within 3 to 6 months, if not right away, you can see that you converted those people that attended. Excuse me. So if that's the case, you'll know that those resources that went into that event, whether they paid off. One thing to be aware of with events is it's not just dollars. So maybe you put something on your credit card and you can see all the expenses that went into it. But there's a lot of time that goes into events. They're very time intensive if you don't have that event in a box kind of strategy set up. So if it is time intensive, you have to look at what are those resources that your clients are drawing from. Is there an opportunity lost because your staff is working on an event? And then really, what's their salary and their compensation? So if they're dedicating 10% of their time to an event during a month, that could be a pretty sizable dollar amount if you do that allocation and kind of do that in your head. So events, if done wrong, can be a waste of time and a waste of dollars, but if they're done right, you can really measure to see that success. With events, I like to break events into like 4 different categories, whether it's in the industry education, it's outside the industry education, whether it's lifestyle, which is gigantic. There's a whole bunch of things you can do in lifestyle, and then philanthropic. And sometimes you can have a crossover and have multiple things. So a golf event for charity might be that lifestyle kind of fun thing to do, but it also ties in some charitable component. So event marketing is a huge thing. Not a fit for everybody, but definitely something we'll talk about in the program. There are so many books out there with advice on how to get client referrals, and there are so many do not things to do, like just mistakes that speakers and so-called experts have pushed on people for so long, to the point that if you bring up the topic of asking for client referrals, most people don't want to even have the conversation. And we've done a lot of research over the years to talk with clients and what they expect. Most of them don't want to be asked, and most businesses don't want to ask. So all kinds of advice on how to word that and how to get over those initial concerns and really go into the heart of why you're in the business and the real strength of the relationship. Once you tie in those two things, you'll be so much more successful at getting the conversation going, because if you don't have the conversation, it really hurts you. But once you get the conversation going, it's just an easy thing that can lead to new business. Not all the time, but if you're not having those conversations, you're really probably missing out on a huge opportunity. Okay, I mentioned a little earlier strategic alliances. Some people will refer to them as centers of influence, people that can introduce you and make introductions to help you grow your business. I'm a huge believer that this is a potential to grow your business. So how do you start to identify them and think of who they might be? Most people are kind of limited in what they're thinking. Maybe there's 1 or 2 professions that the whole industry goes after. But really, if you identify that target market, so sorry to repeat myself, but if you go back to that target market work and the research and knowing them better than anyone else, you'll start to identify what I call like spokes on the wheel. So imagine yourself and your client being at the center of the wheel, and the rubber of the wheel is the world. All those spokes are ways that they interact with the world. And so all those spokes can be identified as potential lead sources. And once you identify the lead sources, then you can kind of build up a strategy of how do you start the relationship, how do you maximize it. I should have started with this, but if you do have an existing strategic alliance, a lot of times when we work with businesses, they give out more leads than they get back. So one of the things that we'll do is start with a list of, in the last 5 years, who have you given a lead to, and then identify, what are the duds, what are the people that aren't giving leads back. Can those relationships be improved? If not, you got to consider letting go of that relationship and then replacing it. And there's a whole bunch of steps of how to best replace them. But if there are ways to increase that relationship, there are probably 20 to 50 different tactics that you can do to increase that alliance. Most people kind of fail because they think, I'll only have a good strategic alliance if I give them leads. That's not the truth. You know, that you scratch my back, I scratch yours. That approach really works, but if you don't have the lead to give them, how can you get leads back? There's all kinds of ways that you can increase the success of their business. Co-branded things, different activities, different promotions that can really foster a really strong relationship. So the secret to a good strategic alliance strategy is really thinking more creatively than your competition. If they're in a kind of that traditional role of only thinking of one or two lead sources, there's so many different ways that you can uncover some great leads. And so again, going back to the target market, knowing them better than anyone else, knowing who influences them, what activities they participate in, what behaviors they show, how do they think, where are they gravitated the most. As you kind of peel back the onion and learn more and more about your client, there'll be all kinds of ways that you can uncover lead sources. So another category of how to grow is marketing just as a whole. From a consulting standpoint, you got to know where clients are, so you kind of start with that. What have you done and what's worked and what hasn't worked? That's a really good exercise to do. A lot of times, it's I don't know what I don't know type of approach with marketing, or they threw the spaghetti at the wall and it didn't stick, so they gave up. That one-shot mentality, and then they give up. Marketing should have a really well thought out strategy, identifying those target markets. How do you penetrate them? How do you get to them? Where are all the different activities? And then back to the business plan, or the growth plan, whatever you want to call it. Do you have a specific plan of how you're going to market to them? And then do you hold yourself accountable? So something like email, do you have an editorial calendar? And that goes back to your website and your content and your PR and maybe even advertising, event strategy. They all start to plug in. And again, if you just kind of have this ad hoc approach and it's not really well thought out, it's not going to be this whole comprehensive approach that's all correlated and in some ways piggybacking. There's a thing called cadence marketing. So for example, if you send out a direct mail campaign just once, it's not going to be as successful as if you add other components to that, the cadence part of it. So maybe the direct mail would go out with a calling effort, with a follow-up email, social media post. So the more ways that you can reach out to a prospect, the more successful you'll be. Things that we'll look at too is the marketing mix. So there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do, and everybody has limited resources, right? So how are you going to maximize your marketing spend and your time? Doing that target market assessment and looking at where are the most effective ways to penetrate that target market, to support them, to get in front of them, to wow them, and get them maybe with an inbound marketing strategy, which is free, just besides the time it costs to build out the content and post it. But there are other ways that you can do that are inorganic, that you're actually buying things or paying for things to bring in business. Usually like to start with the free things first and identify the right mix and work with our clients to figure out what's that strategy. So for this audience, we could talk about that different marketing mix and look at what are those different components that you do well, that you don't do well, and you need to think about how you can maximize them. Definitely one of the most important things in today's day and age is a great website. Hopefully you're at the point where you have a responsive design website, which means it looks great on a cell phone. I could give you a whole bunch of statistics on that, but just know that we're now going, majority of the time, we're using a handheld device to get to your website. We could look at statistics to see if that's true or not. But in general, you have to be a very mobile-friendly website. But how does your website perform? Do you look at a tool like Google Analytics, and do you get into the what content is getting the most clicks and the most amount of time? Do you have a bad bounce rate where people come to your site and bounce right off? Do you have a lead funnel? A lead funnel is probably that thing that we repeatedly say there's a really way to improve your firm, where you look at how does your website get them into consideration and awareness, and then go into the different stages to get them ultimately to conversion, where they become your client. And so that lead funnel, how do you create a freemium or a giveaway or whatever it might be that they're going to trade their contact information, so they're not just this website visitor that you know nothing about. How are you going to start to capture their information to be able to convert them to a client later on? A big part of marketing nowadays should be video related. I'm a huge fan of videos. Where I won't get into it too much now, but AI is going to replace a lot of search results for text, but videos will still have a very good success rate on if you post them on YouTube or wherever it might be, because people want to watch videos and digest them. Where text is going to be easier to replicate, AI will get into competing for videos too. But videos, like I said in the client referrals little mention, they are a way to get introduced, to have people share and get the word out. Just another great way to digest content and wow your clients and wow your prospects so they want to work with you. Thank you very much for joining me for the first episode. I ran out of time, so we'll do a part 2, what the program is going to be about on the next episode. I really hope that this has been helpful. I can't wait to dive into all these questions and give specific advice to help you increase your success. Really looking forward to doing it. So thank you for joining Business Best by Mike Byrnes. Thank you.